You're listening to 106.9 TuneFM here on the home of UNE's student-powered radio. My name is Ash, and I'm joined in the studio today by the wonderful Sherri Donaldson from the School of Environmental and Rural Science. And today we're going to be talking fossils, opals, and all things in between because it is World Environment Day. So to get a picture of how the environment has changed over the years, we're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into Sherri's work and hopefully give you all an idea of what it was like here in Australia a very, very long time ago. So thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah, it's fantastic to have you in the studio. And to make things easy, sort of the first question we'll go into is, in your own words, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, well, my name's Sherri Donaldson. I'm a second year PhD student in the Paleoscience Research Centre and Betts Lab, supervised by Dr. Marissa Betts, Drs. Phil Bell and Nick Campioni.
All people we're all very big fans of.
Yes, and I think you've had them all on the podcast before.
Yep.
So I've got big shoes to fill. And what I'm doing, my field area is at Lightning Ridge, sort of 600-700 kilometres west of us in Armidale. And I'm trying to reconstruct the paleoecology of the Cretaceous-aged Gryman Creek Formation by studying the freshwater mollusks and terrestrial flora together with the vertebrates and geological indicators. Now, in simple terms, because that was a hell of a mouthful. So in more general terms, I'm exploring the vast collections of fossil freshwater mollusks, so bivalves and gastropods, or clams and snails, from the Lightning Ridge region, and they're about 100 million years old. And what I'm doing is, together with the newly described plant fossils, paper coming out soon, plus the earlier dinosaur and geological evidence, I'm trying to refine the picture of what the ecosystem looked like over 100 million years ago.
Which I think sounds... we all sort of think about what life would have been like back then. It's captured so many imaginations. I mean, Jurassic Park. I know it's a different era and it's not very scientifically accurate, but the imagination is there. So it's interesting to think about how very different it would have been like in Australia, which I think already captures people's primordial imagination in a way. I mean, here in Armidale, we have the Gondwana rainforest. We have these little pockets. And then Lightning Ridge, it's not so far away from us. So I think it's very, very cool what you're doing.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it.
Well, it's interesting you say that because Jurassic Park is technically set in the Cretaceous because that's when the dinosaurs we all know and love were around. So
Cretaceous Park just doesn't have the same...
It doesn't have the same ring. And when I tell people I'm a paleontologist, I study fossils, I go, oh, dinosaurs. And I go, no, I look at everything that doesn't have bones. So I look at plants and the invertebrate fossil record. And they sort of look at you a bit weird, and then I say they're opalized, and they go,
ooh, shiny.
So a combination of beautiful preservation, and I've got tens of thousands of specimens to play with, which is much bigger and larger than the number of dinosaur fossils. So we can tell a much richer story. It's not sexy, but we can tell a richer story.
Telling a richer story. I'm a storyteller at heart. I think telling the richest story you can is pretty sexy, in my opinion. I think that's, if you can sit down and you can show me, this is what we learnt from these fossils, and this is what this specific line represents. Because, I'm no expert, but I think for mollusks, growth is similar to, in trees. So they have, the rings, and that sort of determines things a little bit. And you're making a face. I'm not on...
Well, it's not exactly like dendrochronology, which is the tree rings, but growth lines in bivalves, for example, and gastropods, they have little growth rings as well. They do signify passings of time, but it's not seasonal, and it is very difficult to measure.
So you can't point to a growth ring on a shell and go, so we can see here that this was a really wet winter. Or
no, I really wish we could, but we just can't, because it's down to temperature, salinity, availability of how wet it was, how dry it was, and so it's seasonal and within a season. So it's not quite as easy, especially with the material from Lightning Ridge, because I don't have any original shell material left.
Because it's all been fossilised and opalised.
It's been fossilised sort of 90 to 100 million years ago, and then about 25 to 30 million years ago, the whole lot was dissolved and replaced by hydrated silica in the form of opal. So we've effectively got beautiful, in many cases, casts of fossils,
Yeah.
but we don't have the original material left.
So it's an imperfect record of an already imperfect record in a way.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Very pretty.
They are. And if you look at the pictures that you can put up, then you'll see some beautiful examples. Not all of mine are that gorgeous, though.
But I think every little thing, they all have their own little character. You know, it's one might have a chip here somewhere, or it's got a funky shape in this way, or they each have their own little characteristics, I think. But before we get ahead of ourselves, you mentioned paleoecology, and I've also seen the term paleobotany used. So what exactly are they?
Okay, so to break down the terms, so I'm technically a paleontologist, so I study old, long dead things. Paleo is old. Botany is the study of plants. So we have botanical studies here, we have a herbaria here on campus, but paleobotany is the study of old plants. And paleoecology is the study of ecology, but ancient ecology. So if you look at ecology, it's classed as a natural science of the relationships between living organisms and their environments. So between living things and the environments they live in, so like the soils, the water, the temperature, the amount of sunlight. So all of those things make up paleoecology. It's not just, I've got some bones and this is the creature that they belong to. I've got these things, how did they live within the environment? How did they contribute to or take from and interact with other animals in that environment? So that's what paleoecology is. So I'm joining up already the dinosaurs that we've described. We have described some of the bivalves and the gastropods, but I'm actually telling the story of what they did, where they did, and how they did it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we forget about is, yes, the dinosaurs were very big and early mammals were very big and very interesting, and they're what everyone thinks of. They're the superstars. But you know, even today we live in a world where these smaller invertebrates, these smaller creatures, they play a very massive role in our environment, in our ecosystems. And that was true tens of thousands of millions of years ago. It's not changed very much, I think.
You go out and go for a bushwalk here, you'll find vertebrates. So you'll find kangaroos and wallabies, and you'll find lizards and birds. So they're the big things you can see. You might see caterpillars or dragonflies or something like that. But you're surrounded by bush, you're surrounded by plants, you're surrounded by smaller organisms. And if you're in the waterways, in the creeks and the rivers, you'll find things like freshwater crayfish, you'll find fish, I was quite surprised because we're on the top of the range here, but I have found bivalves living up here, and I'm thinking, how did you get here? You have no arms, legs, wings. You know, their distribution is interesting, and it's done by there's interactions with other parts of the animal kingdom. So it's bigger stories. It's not just, I found a thing and this is what it looks like. It's, I found a thing, this is what it looks like and what it did and where it did it.
Let's build that picture.
Absolutely.
So what got you interested in deciding to study specifically bivalves?
Okay, so I'm going to take you back to 2016. I left my corporate world and decided to become a scientist. Always wanted to become one, and I thought it's now or never. So I did some night classes and I got into a geology degree up in Aberdeen in Scotland. And a month before I started that, I did a fossil dig out at the Australian Opal Centre at Lightning Ridge because I knew nothing about fossils down here and it just looked amazing, and I was coming out to visit some friends and family, and I went on this dig and I met Phil and I met Jenny at the AOC, and I discovered they had this huge collection of invertebrates, so snails and bivalves in the collections, but nobody was really doing anything. And I said, with that volume of material, surely we can tell a story with that. And as a kid, I'd always collected shells, and I spent all my pocket money on buying fancy, beautiful subtropical shells like cowries and tritons and various other things. And through the depths of my time on this planet, I've been separated from those, and they're gone down the trail without me.
Back to nature.
Exactly. But by starting my undergrad geology, I kept in touch. I volunteered with the AOC over the years, and 9 years later, I'm doing a PhD in something that I saw 9 years ago. So I'm very excited.
Very quick academic journey.
I know. It's 4 years undergrad, and then COVID hit. Yay, COVID class of 2020. And then Masters of Research in Edinburgh. And then I proposed my project to Phil and Marissa. We had a couple of Zooms, and the rest is history. I'm halfway through.
On the other side of the world, no less.
On the other side of the world and halfway through my PhD. So yeah, it's very exciting.
It is very exciting. I think it's like, and this is why I love talking to PhD students, because no one is more of an expert in your field than you. Like I could talk to someone else about this sort of stuff, but what you are doing is you are the expert in it. You've identified this gap and you're filling that gap. You are drawing these pictures and making these lines. And I think that's pretty brilliant.
That's really quite frightening, but it is actually quite true. Because
it is scary.
Well, Lightning Ridge, I mean, it is such a unique environment. We do have other similarly Cretaceous age deposits in Australia, not a huge amount. We've got some down on the south coast in Victoria.
There's zircons over in WA somewhere.
Yeah, they're much, much older, but we use them for dating the formations. Folks might know of Winton. So we've got the dinosaurs and things they find up in Winton, and then a bit further south in Eromanga. So they're similarly aged, slightly younger than Lightning Ridge, and the material from Victoria is slightly older, sort of 5-10 million years older. So we're in the middle of the Cretaceous age strata on the east coast of Australia. So Lightning Ridge is a fantastic environment. It's just underground. We can't get to it easily like we can in the other parts.
What makes Lightning Ridge such a unique and very good place for the study of fossils?
Okay, so in days gone by, Lightning Ridge was in the southern part of the Surat Basin, which goes north into Queensland, and which was on the edge of the ancient Eromanga Sea, which came and went throughout the Mesozoic, so the Jurassic and Cretaceous ages. So Lightning Ridge is in the southern part of that basin, and it sort of preserves the final retreat of the Eromanga Sea, which drained out to the north, up through the Gulf of Carpentaria. And so we have a mix of terrestrial, so land-dwelling plants and animals, as well as there is some marine, so saltwater animals. We've got some sharks and some plesiosaurs, which some of my lab mates are working on. And then we've got the sort of the freshwater to estuarine species, such as the fish, the turtles, the crocodiles, and the invertebrates, so the freshwater crayfish, and my guys, the bivalves and the gastropods. So we have a complete ecosystem preserved underground in opal mines, and that without the miners we never would have known about the fossils. We don't go down and collect the material ourselves. We go down, we are presented material to study from miners and or the AOC, the Opal Centre, to study. So it's a difficult situation, a difficult environment.
Very difficult, yeah.
It's not like you can go out to in the Badlands of Canada or North America and go dig things out of a mesa, or as Phil and Nick head out to Mongolia and do some beautiful work out there. Maybe next year, Sherri.
I did speak with Nick about it. I was like, oh, this sounds really cool. I don't have $10,000.
Yeah, I've got a PhD to finish. But what we have here is a unique relationship with the local community that has been built up over tens of years, decades, and that they have put their material into public collections. So it's not just Lightning Ridge that I work on. There's collections in the Queensland Museum and Australian Museum in Sydney as well. And I think there's some in the South Australian Museum, but I've not managed to get across there yet. So we've got a huge array of material in different places that's available to study. But the place itself, we've had a lot of erosion over the millennia, so that's why the sediments are not as obvious as we would like them to be. And particularly in Lightning Ridge, most of the exposures, as we call it in geological terms, are subterranean, so they're underground. Whereas a little bit further in north, across the border in Surat, there's some that you can walk along and actually look at them, but there's no opalized fossils in them. So the opalization was really niche. It was really localized in what we call the Neogene, so 30 to 25 million years ago, and that came through and preserved this material in the silica as it is today.
And so I imagine that would have come from like sediment in the riverine systems.
The opalization, there's a number of theories as to how that happened. We're not doing geology as such, but we had ancient times. We had big volcanic province off the where are we? Off the east coast of Australia, and when volcanoes erupt, they have a lot of silica in their composition. As that erodes, that can get washed down from mountains. Unlike today where we wash, if we're in Armidale, so we've got a lot of watersheds to the east. In the ancient olden days, it was watershed to the west. So it flowed out to the Eromanga Basin, the Eromanga Sea. But the formation of opal is still a little bit questionable. Did it come from underneath? Did the silica come from underneath, or did the water come from the top? So that's still open to debate.
Yeah, it's always I follow a few people online who are trying to do like lab grown opals, and they're cool, but they're not quite. They never look the same.
No, they don't. And they discovered that they could, like Australian, the CSIRO, they discovered how to make opal so by lining up the tiny nanospheres of silica. And it's the reflection of light from within the spheres that gives us the opal play of colour, or POC, as you might see written down. A lot of the opal material is common opal. It's called what we call potch or honey potch, which is kind of a honey colour or a bluey brown colour. It just means the spheres are not equally sized and they're not all lined up beautifully to give out that prismatic rainbow play of colour. Whereas when you see any opals that are, in jewellery or in fossils that you see online and things, they've got the layers of nanospheres lined up, which allow them to reflect that rainbow play of colour.
Play of color so I guess before I go and ask that question, I need to ask what the actual process is of learning about the environment from these fossils, because as we established, it's pretty hard to get a record from the bivalves. And what we're trying to do, what you're trying to do is learn about the environment that it was like then and build that story. So what is the actual process of going from here is a fossil that I found, and here is now what we can extrapolate about the ecosystem and the environment that it lived in?
Great question. So about half a dozen of the bivalve species that are found at Lightning Ridge before I came on to my PhD have been identified by previous workers. So they've identified them and gone, these guys lived in fresh water. We can compare and contrast. It's comparative anatomy. You look at similar things. We're also looking at the sediments they're coming out of underground, so we can see that there's not a lot of sand and there's more muds and clay stones and things like that. And the way they've been deposited, we have some record of that, of the miners saying that. We can also tell by associated material. So there's a lot of plant material found with these shells. It's more likely to be a freshwater or a wet terrestrial system that we're working with. Similarly, with turtles and crocodiles and fish and freshwater crayfish, we can build up our picture by association. So if I just found a single shell, it'd be like, wow, this is amazing, but doesn't tell me anything. Which is why if you're ever anywhere and you find a paleontologist and you go, oh wow, tell me what this is, we ask you questions. Where did you find it? Yeah. What was it in? Because we need that context to help us tell the story. So with the Lightning Ridge material, we've got quite a lot of provenance. We've got rough depths of where things come from, and we've got a lot of associated material as well as sedimentology, which I'm also helping to in my research in the latter part of this year. I'll be looking at more of the sediments as well. So it's all starting to come together.
Which I think that's the best part of it. I've got this outline, and now going from the foundations, the blueprints, and then seeing it all come together is I think a very rewarding part of it all. So what role does the sedimentology play in this?
Well, it's a huge part because it basically captures or entrains all our fossils. And unlike vertebrates that have legs, like our theropods and our sauropods and our little ornithopod bopping around on the land, they can move when conditions change. Whereas plants and bivalves and gastropods, pretty sessile. They just kind of stay there. So they can't really move. So when we find them, how we find them, are they found whole and complete and closed? Or are we just finding like a single shell or a pile of single shells? Are we finding them open? All of this degrees of articulation, as we call it, tells us whether the animals were more likely or not to be alive when they died. Because if they're fully closed up, they've been alive and they've gone, oh no, there's danger, and they've closed themselves up really quickly and may have been buried and suffocated. If you find them butterflied, like two pippies on a beach, most of us have seen pippies on a beach in a single shell or a single valve, or as a butterfly, as we call it, the two shells wide open, that means that the animal was already dead and got tumbled and transported. So we can tell a lot by how we find them and where we find them. And the sediment style, do we have lots of gravels? Do we have lots of pebbles? Do we have lots of fine silts? That tells you the energy of the environment that these guys were deposited in. Not necessarily what they lived in, but what caused them to be found in that aggregation at that time. So we don't find a lot of pebbles or sand in them where we find the fossils at Lightning Ridge. So it's a fairly quiet, lower energy environment that allows stuff to settle, sediment to settle out of the water column, and just these guys just lived in the bottom and were filter feeders. The snails, they can move around. They don't move far, but they can move around. So they can climb on buried logs or rocks or substrate they can crawl around on, but they still need to be wet to live. They all have gills.
You were saying earlier that the fossils have become opalized through deposits of silica. That's how opals happen. Does that then change what we can glean about the environment that they lived in, because that sediment has then been possibly replaced entirely by a silica-rich sediment? Does that make it more difficult?
It does make it more difficult because we don't have any of rarely in the fossil record do we have the original material, but we have altered material. Whereas in the case of a lot of the material from Lightning Ridge, it has just been completely dissolved away and void filled. So it's like we've got little jelly baby molds.
Yeah.
And that does affect the sediment to an extent, but not as, because there's cappings of silcrete and things further up in the succession. But with the fossils from Lightning Ridge, they're not. It doesn't affect the sediment too badly around it. It's more the structures that are preserved. So if you've got ripples, if you've got bedding planes where a surface was and maybe it had been burrowed and then covered over by fine silts, we know that if we do actually have burrows, so we can go at this point, this was the land surface, we've got burrows, and then we've now got a fine rock unit above the top, which means it's been flooded over and we've got silt settling out of there. So we can tell so much just from sediments. The fact we've got fossils in it means we can tell a richer story as well.
Very true. And I suppose mussels and bivalves, they haven't really changed much over the years. It's, evolutionarily speaking, they're kind of the same.
Yeah.
But are their roles different in what roles they play in the environment?
We can infer a lot. I mean, with bivalves, so the river mussels that you find today, if you're out west here in the Murray-Darling system and you find a freshwater clams or whatever, use them for bait or cooking or whatever, most of them are imperiled. Most of them are endangered, so please don't. And plus they don't taste great either, because what they are is filter feeders. And they have been filter feeding since the Cambrian. Yeah. So if we go right back to the beginning of more complex life, we've got bivalves and mollusks back in the Cambrian 500 plus million years ago. They didn't start to enjoy the delights of living in freshwater until the Devonian, so 419 million years ago. And then they really took off in the Triassic, so 200 plus million years ago. But like you say, water's the same throughout the history of the Earth. And what the bivalves do is they live in the sediment, so they're sessile. They might move 50 centimetres to a metre if the water starts to dry up. So if your billabong or your river's drying, they can move to stay damp or wet or submerged. But they can also, some species can live outside of water but buried in wet sediment for a little while. So they can survive periods of dryness. But what they do is they have no arms, no legs, no eyes. They just sit in the sediment and have an inhalant siphon. So they bring water through the gills. They've got an exhalant siphon, which they exhale waste and filtered water. And these little animals can filter between 12 and 24 litres per day per animal that's about as big as your finger. So 6-7 centimetre long bivalve can filter huge volumes of water. And they live in reefs. They make up what we call a mussel bed or a reef on the riverbed or in the edge of the lagoon or the dam or the billabong. They aggregate together, so they're filtering a humongous amount of sediment from the water, they're filtering chemicals, they're filtering pathogens, they're filtering all sorts of things from the water column and making water drinkable. They're making water clear so that other animals and plants and algae and things like that can grow. And by making a bed on the riverbed, so mussel beds, they provide shelter for fish eggs and other invertebrate eggs and a nursery area for baby fish and other wee creatures. So they're called ecosystem engineers because they change the habitat in which they live. So when we're talking about ecosystem engineers, it's the animals that change the habitat that they live in. Another good example of that are beavers, which you get in the Northern Hemisphere, because they chop down trees and they drag trees and wood and make dams and wetlands. So they're ecosystem engineers. Closer to home, we have the Great Barrier Reef with all the corals. They're creating an ecosystem for fish and turtles and other shells and other species in the sea. So we have a lot of examples of ecosystem engineering done by quite disparate types of animals. But freshwater mollusks and freshwater bivalves particularly are really key in freshwater habitats and food webs.
Yeah.
So by taking in and filtering all the bad things out of the water, they're creating clean water, environments.
It's such a shame that they're endangered these days, because what a massively important role in our environments. I mean, we are living in an age of, it's the Anthropocene, you know, we are living in an era where humans are very much negatively impacting the environment. Yeah. And creatures like these mussels, like these bivalves that are filter feeders that are cleaning the waterways. I mean, I saw that, I don't remember where it is, but it's a clam, and they attached a very, very scientific sensor to this clam, yes. And when the water quality got bad, the clam would shut and it would cut off the water supply. That's
actually in Poland. 2 cities in Poland actually use modern freshwater mussels as their water quality monitors. So they've actually hot glue gunned a spring and a magnet to one of their valves, one of their shells, and when the animal is just relaxed and it's feeding and it's just filtering water normally, that magnet is far enough away from the sensor to keep the sensor disconnected. But as soon as they close, if there's danger or if there's pathogens that have been detected, they shut. And those few millimeters that the animal closes allows the magnet to hit the sensor, and the sensor then shuts down the water supply. I can't think of the 2 towns in Poland. They use them on they have 8 mussels, and they rotate them, so they catch them in the wild. Yeah. They put them to work for a couple of weeks, and then they release them back into the wild and put another 8 out.
And I just think, what a great way to interact with and engage with the environment around you. This isn't high tech. This isn't fancy AI machine. Magnet. Yeah, it's easy, it's cheap, and it's teaching people about the role that these animals play. And I think, I know we're talking about very, very old animals, but I mean, they haven't changed much.
No, these animals haven't changed much.
They've hit their niche. They've perfected evolution. They're staying where they are.
Literally and figurative.
Yeah. I don't think, 50,000 years' time, probably still going to have them.
Yes, providing they've still got fresh water.
But even, they live in salt water as well, slightly different. Yes. But there are saltwater mussels, and I hope we still have fresh water in 50,000 years' time. Not that I'll have to worry about that. I won't be here.
No, but I should have finished my PhD by then.
Hopefully. And I guess it's just not only, the creatures that you are studying telling us about a very rich story in history, they're also writing that story still today. So people, in 10,000 years' time, whatever, they're still going to find these fossils.
Yes.
And maybe they won't be the same ones that you are studying now, but they will sort of tell the same story. And I think that's pretty beautiful.
Yeah, it's actually, I really like that. That's a nice analogy. We're taking a deep time story, and I can take the freshwater bivalves, as I said, back to the Triassic and maybe even into the late Devonian, when they first could tolerate lower salinities, because everything started in the ocean. Yeah. So, but we can take it into the future as well. The fact that we're able to use them in an industrial way to keep us safe and to keep our water supply safe is really, it is innovative. But the downside to that is that so many of our waterways globally are polluted.
Massively polluted. And
Australia has less than 40 odd species of freshwater bivalve, a number of different families, but you very rarely find multiple species in the same space. They all have quite a niche of where they live. So even the loss of a creek or a river or a tributary or something like that can be really quite devastating.
And, as climate change worsens, and we see it in Armidale, I think, very easily, even just in Australia. We already live in a country with massive extremes, but those extremes are getting worse. We've just had very, very bad floods. And, before that, I remember we had very, very bad bushfires, and we're having very, very bad drought. And the droughts are getting longer, and the period of no drought in between is getting shorter. And I forget what my point was with that, other than that I'm enjoying the conversation. But I think those are the sorts of things that we need to keep in mind. And they're things that we can document now, but we didn't have people tens of millions of years ago to document that sort of stuff. So we're relying on the natural record.
And because these animals, most of them live in the brown water, because we don't have crystal clear mountain streams like you do in Europe and North America, in a lot of places, you don't see them. They're unseen. They live in the dubs at the bottom of billabongs, on the sides of rivers, under tree banks, things like that. So they're really unseen, but they're really critical. And yeah, so we're getting hotter and drier and burning more, and that's affecting, that burn runoff is going into our waterways. It's affecting what's in there, not just fish and turtles and crocodiles and the big things. It's affecting all the little things as well. Everything's joined up. You don't just focus on one animal. You have to focus on the whole ecology, the whole environment that they're in.
It is, that is why we call it a web. It's all interconnected. I guess the point that I think I was building to was the pollutants that we have now, they are very different. They are very severe, and a majority of them, nearly all of them, are man-made. Microplastics, oil spills, things like that. They're all very much caused by humans. But pollutants still existed, like many, many, many years ago.
Yes, if you've got a fire that goes through ravages an area of bushland or ancient forest or whatever, you will get runoff, and that will cause faunal turnover in environments where, particularly in river systems, where the animals can't escape.
Yeah. You kind of there's nowhere for you to go. Really.
No, there's nowhere for you to go. And then also, if you have heavy rains further upstream and you have floods coming through, we can see with the modern day floods, the volume of sediment that gets washed off the mountains or that gets washed into the fields and then gets taken out to sea, all of that changes the chemistry of the environment that it's going through. And the material that gets tumbled down, rocks and trees and twigs and all of that sort of stuff, hits the bottom of the rivers and turns that over as well. So although you might think these mussels and clams just live happily in the bottom of a creek, a grapevine, but then they're only sitting there. They can be shoved out the way. They can be disturbed. They can be, if you get a big deluge, it changes the water chemistry. So you might have something that's been drying and evaporating and getting a little bit more salty over many years. And then all of a sudden you get a huge flood event that comes through and dilutes it all, and everybody's going, oh, this isn't tasty.
I adapted perfectly to the salinity.
And it's now fresh, So all of these things, big things, impact the little creatures that we've got in these environments.
That's that we can. So I know we don't have, at least for the ones that you study, I mean, I suppose just in general as well, because that's what a fossil is. We don't have the original material of the shell or the soft little critter that lives inside. That's long gone. But can we still see evidence of this in like the size of the shell, the shape of the shell, the fin?
In other deposits where the shells have not been completely dissolved and replaced, so outside of Lightning Ridge, material that we have in Victoria, some of the stuff that we've got up in Queensland, we do have original, modified shell material. So we still have something we can do geochemistry analysis on or with, which is great. And in other deposits around the world, even older deposits, we can find original modified material, if you like, and we can do geochemical analysis, and that can certainly help us. It can tell us a lot about the climate, a lot about the salinity, that sort of thing. So there are plenty of opportunities for telling really rich stories, but it's a multi-proxy approach, to use a buzzword bingo.
We love buzzwords.
But by taking not just the study of an animal. So I came to paleontology through geology because, that's what they had at my university.
Makes sense. So. Related.
And I thought, if I know the rocks, I can learn the animals. And some people come through animals and have to learn about the rocks. So there's different ways in. And then once we're in this realm, we've got rocks and remains, and we can bring in things like geochemistry, we can bring in geophysics, we can bring in all the other areas of geoscience and bioscience and zoology. We can just bring that, all of our knowledge, we can just join it all up together. And there's very little scope now for finding a single fossil and going, oh wow, I'm going to get a paper on a single thing. Is the thing, and how does the thing relate to the other things and the bigger, more richer story? Because that's what we want now. We need to be able to tell a wider story. Don't give me a shallow little puddle of information. If I'm interested in something, I want to be able to do a full-on scuba dive into this. I want to know, what was the environment like? How do we know
what the environment was like. What is it specifically about this one specific mussel that tells us that, it was salt water, or it was fresh water, or it was this, or it was that? And I think that's what I really admire about, people like yourself who are doing this really integral work, because the more that we understand about our past, the more we can sort of understand about how we are shaping our future.
Yes.
Because, there are records of previous extinction events, and I feel like every time I talk about this subject, I get very, philosophical. But, it's the little guys. It always comes back to the little guys. If it wasn't for the little guys, you might think, okay, a pippy, whatever, it's a pippy. Or it's a freshwater mussel, big whoop. But it just comes back to the little guys. Without them, we wouldn't know all of this story that you're telling. Exactly. We wouldn't know without them.
And, big dinosaurs have to drink fresh water.
That's true. We have to drink fresh water.
We have to drink fresh water. And if these rivers and creeks and waterways weren't purified by nature's filter, then we wouldn't have had the rich diversity of life that we actually have, particularly at Lightning Ridge.
Yeah.
We would just have had, we might have found a dinosaur on migration to somewhere else in between watering holes, whereas actually we've got the fish, we've got the proof that there was fresh water there, and we've got tens of thousands of these little guys that are trying to tell us their story.
I remember, because I watched the interview that you did with the Australian Opal Centre on these, and you were both talking about how, these are so common. We find them everywhere. They're so boring. I don't know if I could ever be someone who was like, great, another fossil. They're just, every day's a new awesome thing in the world.
It is. And the more you look, the more you see. And I'll let you in on a little tidbit. Not only do we have our freshwater mussels, and we know we've got dinosaurs, we know we've got the other animals living there, but we've got proof of interaction between species, because some of the bivalves have got teeth marks.
Yeah.
So there's work being done. I'm doing work on predation.
Yeah.
So who bit my bivalves?
Yeah. Exactly. And that's the sort of stuff
we're joining it all up, and
one big
then,
happy family.
Exactly. And the other thing that we are finding is, another common fossil we don't get at Lightning Ridge, but you find in a lot of deposits, is literally coprolites.
Yeah.
Poop. Exactly.
Go and buy fossilized poop online for relatively cheap, actually.
Yeah, and where I was in Edinburgh, we could just go down to the seashore and find coprolites, fish coprolites. So, but what's in those is bits of bivalves.
Yeah.
So who's eating them? So, there's a much richer story, and we're just scraping the surface here. And the more you look, the more you find.
I just think that's so cool. I think, I mentioned earlier, we were talking about the future, the story ahead, what's happening in the future. So asking the big questions, how can what we learn about these past environments help prepare us for the future?
So in geological terms, there was a phrase set out in the late 1800s, the key to the present is in the past. So by looking at the fossil record, yes, humans weren't around. Yes, pollutants as we know them in the modern day weren't around. But we can look and see what has happened and how things changed through the rock record and through the fossil record. Like I said, we can look for charcoal back in the Carboniferous. We can look for different types of deposits. We can see fossilized tsunami deposits. So we can see on land where a tsunami, so saltwater marine, has dumped things that were in the marine realm way up inland. So we can see a huge amount. It causes conundrums when you're in a terrestrial environment and you're going, well, why have I got seashells up here? Yeah. But together, it's not just paleontology, it's all of the geosciences looking through geophysics and geochemistry. They can all tell us the stories. And what we're trying to do now, or what we should all be trying to do now, is observe the natural world around us and how we're changing it. That's probably the biggest thing, because that will give us the fine nuances to what's going to happen in the future in terms of pollutions, in terms of microplastics, in terms of climate change. We can all see the climate's changing, and it's not all sweetness and light in terms of warming generally. And floods are getting, I nearly said floodier. floods
not incorrect.
Not incorrect, but floods are getting bigger and more extreme, and heat pulses are getting longer and more extreme, and the winds, and hail and damaging, environmental weather conditions are getting more often and more extreme. So that's happening. That's real time. And that's happening now. So observing what we can in the natural world now and seeing how the animals adapt, the plants adapt or not, that's going to be so informative going forward.
And I think the other thing too is that we have these previous examples of very large-scale mass extinctions. The planet bounced back. Not all the creatures, and I bring this point up all the time, not all the creatures.
They didn't. The planet did, yes. And there'll be plants, so if something happens to us, if we get another Chicxulub meteor coming to wipe us out, if we don't do it quick enough ourselves, but if we get wiped out by space rock, life finds a way.
Yeah. And there'll be the mussels and the bivalves.
They will be, yep.
Outlive all of us.
But there'll be plants that survive, there'll be invertebrates that survive, there'll be vertebrates that survive. It just depends on where the catastrophe really hits.
Thank you so much. I feel like I could keep this going longer. I would love to. We are about to hit an hour. So two quick fire finals.
Okay.
What is the most rewarding part for you in studying these creatures?
Telling stories. I love telling stories and asking questions, and it's important. We need to know the richer story.
And second, is there anything that I have forgotten to ask or that we have missed that you think is important to share?
Ooh, I think we've covered quite a lot. And I think I'm good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sherri, for joining me. It's been an absolutely brilliant conversation.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been great.
Yeah. And thank you all for listening. You can find the interview that I mentioned with Sherri on the Australian Opal Centre's, I think it's the Australian Opal Centre's YouTube page. And if you have anywhere that people can read your research that has been published, if you'd like to share that,
I can send you links if you wanted to put it on the podcast page.
Wonderful.
Curiosity Mine is the YouTube page.
That's it.
Yes.
Yeah. There you are, Curiosity Mine, and there'll be links to papers in the show notes.